All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Poppy Harlow.
And I'm Jim Sciutto. This morning, new revelations about the crucial first days of the Russia investigation. The former acting FBI director breaking his silence about why he launched the FBI's probe into the Trump campaign's ties with Russia. Andrew McCabe says that he feared the investigation might be blocked before it started and that he could be fired next. Speaking to CBS, McCabe also reveals new details about the meeting with President Trump just hours after he fired FBI Director James Comey.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia, our most formidable adversary on the world stage. And that was something that troubled me greatly.
How long was it after that you decided to start the obstruction of justice and counterintelligence investigations involving the president?
I think the next day I met with the team investigating the Russia cases, and I asked the team to go back and conduct an assessment to determine where are we with these efforts and what steps do we need to take going forward.
All right, so a lot of jaw-dropping headlines there, and they don't stop there. McCabe also claimed there were meetings within the Justice Department about removing the president by invoking the 25th Amendment. There is clearly a lot to get to this morning, so let's go to Laura Jarrett, who joins us more from the Justice Department. Wow, Laura Jarrett, where do we begin?
Wow, indeed. Well, a remarkably candid interview, Jim and Poppy, from the former acting director of the FBI, the man who opened the investigations, the early investigations into Russia back in 2016 or 2017. And he describes not only the turmoil within the FBI and the Justice Department at the time, the chaotic time after former FBI Director James Comey is fired, but he also goes on to explain how he sought to preserve the record on Russia. Take a listen.
I was very concerned that I was able to put the Russia case on absolutely solid ground in an indelible fashion, that were I removed quickly or reassigned or fired, that the case could not be closed or vanish in the night without a trace. I wanted to make sure that our case was on solid ground, and if somebody came in behind me and closed it and tried to walk away from it, they would not be able to do that without creating a record of why they'd made that decision.
You wanted a documentary record.
That's right.
That those investigations had begun because you feared that they would be made to go away.
That's exactly right.
Earlier this morning, 60 Minutes anchor Scott Pelley also went on to describe that McCabe will confirm for the first time on the record that there were, in fact, discussions about invoking the 25th Amendment to recruit cabinet members to try to oust President Trump from office. Those discussions, as we reported back in September, with the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. And at the time, Rod Rosenstein fiercely pushed back on it. I want to read to you what he said at the time about those reports, including that he sought to wear a wire to record the president. At the time, he said, Poppy and Jim, I never pursued or authorized recording the president, and any suggestion that I have ever advocated for the removal of the president is absolutely false. So obviously more to come on this. The book isn't even out yet.
On the other issue here, because the man who may soon oversee the Mueller probe is, of course, William Barr, Trump's pick for Attorney General. You have new reporting that he's already consulting with top DOJ officials as to how to handle the Mueller report. What have you known?
That's right. I think that the challenge here for Barr is how to balance the fact that the Justice Department does not typically reveal what we call derogatory information, so problematic information about uncharged individuals. They do not typically do that, but at the same time, he has to balance the public's right to know what happened to the Russia investigation, what Mueller found, and so those are the things that he's balancing here. And obviously, the biggest issue is how much does Congress find out about the Mueller report? Under the regulations, they have to say very little, other than the investigation is closed. That's really it. And so Barr is in consultation with top justice officials about what exactly he will say to Congress. Now, no decisions have been made. He hasn't seen the report. He hasn't seen any of the findings. He hasn't even been confirmed yet, but he wants to hit the ground running. Poppy and Jim?
Laura, stay with us. We also have former federal prosecutor Laura Coates and White House reporter for the Washington Post, Sungmin Kim. Listen, a lot to break down here, as Poppy was saying. One that is absolutely catching our attention is that this idea about the 25th Amendment, the idea of using this provision to remove the president from office. Andrew McCabe, well, according to Scott Pelley's account of what Andrew McCabe told him, He says that this was not a theoretical discussion, but that they were, quote, counting noses, already kind of canvassing how many cabinet members might support such a removal. Sungmin Kim, you've been covering this White House for a long time. Is that consistent with your reporting?
Well, I would have to think that, well, there's a lot of dispute, as Laura mentioned earlier, about what those reports really meant, because we do have an on-the-record denial from the Deputy Attorney General about those conversations. Just on the broader McCabe interview, I mean, which was stunning, as we've been discussing for the last several minutes, I have to imagine that what he says and the revelations and his assertions are something that's going to be really infuriating to the president. As if he hasn't seen those interviews clips already, he will. I presume he may tweet about it in the imminent future, because we've seen how the Andrew McCabe has been such a punching bag, a target for the president in some time. And in the CBS report, the White House has already called what Andrew McCabe, the probe that Andrew McCabe opened up, as baseless. So the infuriation from the president is something that I imagine would be happening pretty shortly.
Yes.
Laura Coates, on the 25th Amendment, Laura Jarrett just laid out for us, part of Rosenstein's response to that overall New York Times article that included allegations of him, considering wearing a wire and then talking about invoking the 25th Amendment. On the 25th Amendment part, I was just reminded of Rosenstein's response at the time, and let me read it. Quote, "Let me be clear about this. Based on my personal dealings with the president, there is no basis to invoke the 25th Amendment." The word choice is really important. He doesn't say in that response, this is a few months ago, we never talked about invoking the 25th Amendment, Laura. He says there is no basis to invoke it, Laura Coates. What do you think?
Well, both things can be true, that based on his personal experiences with the President of the United States, he has now come to the conclusion that the 25th Amendment is not warranted. It can also be true that what Andrew McCabe has said, that there was certainly a discussion about whether to pursue it and whether to wear a wire in the instance of trying to figure out and assess whether the President of the United States would be justifiably removed by the 25th Amendment. So I think he was very careful in the economy of words. It all sets up a very interesting dynamic here. Andrew McCabe sets up the president between a rock and a hard place. Either he can say that he believes now that Andrew McCabe is not a liar, which he has branded him as such for quite some time. He has been the punching bag that my colleague spoke about because he believes he is not credible. If the president were to act on this statement, he'd be selectively assigning credibility to something in contrast to what he believes and has said openly about Rod Rosenstein. What's it going to be, Mr. President? Is Andrew McCabe a liar, or should he be believed? And if he should be believed, then a whole Pandora's box is opened about the statements he's made and about instances involving James Comey.
As you mentioned there,
Jim,
yeah,
please.
Jim, just real quick. One of the issues here, I think, is the fact that the Justice Department, and obviously people close to Rod Rosenstein, will point to the fact that Andrew McCabe has been discredited as a liar. He was fired for lying to internal investigators about a separate issue related to the Clinton Foundation and his work on that at the FBI and his role in a report that went to reporters back then. But they will say this is not a reliable narrator. The problem for Rod Rosenstein is that McCabe kept memos. He has contemporaneous notes from way before he was fired about all of this. Yeah. And not only does McCabe have memos, but his top deputy, his lawyer there at the time, Lisa Page, who we've heard so much about from the president given her text messages, she also kept notes. So, and there are more. So the fact that he is seen as sort of a problematic character now, given what happened with the watchdog report at the Justice Department, the internal investigation, is one thing. But I think we do have to balance that against the fact that he did keep contemporaneous notes.
And it's a good point. I was actually going to ask you about this Laura. And let's be clear that the president and his surrogates have attacked they call every witness a liar, right? I mean, they've used it with Michael Cohen. They use it with everybody. And there is basis for that because Michael Cohen, there's a record of lying, as there is with Andrew McCabe. Question is, from a legal standpoint, does that affect how a court sees McCabe's, or a judge sees McCabe's testimony? And how does a judge see contemporaneous notes? Does he treat them as credible, as evidence that is credible evidence?
Well, contemporaneous written memos are very helpful to try to buttress somebody's credibility, because if it's close in time to the incident, which is what the contemporaneous portion means, and it's written at a time when it's fresh in your mind and there's no perhaps motive to lie or motive to concoct, and the court will look at this in a way that it doesn't discredit it entirely. It also can be in front, if there were a jury, it could be part of a case of evidentiary conclusions. However, remember that a court of law in particular, not the court of public opinion, but a court of law is very used to there being unsympathetic witnesses who also can offer credible testimony. There are people who, the old adage is, who testifies against drug dealers, drug users, who testifies against pimps, prostitutes. There is a credibility crisis at all times. However, it doesn't necessarily fatally undermine their credibility. And what Laura Jarrett had to say was very important, in the sense that you've got a whole host of people who are writing contemporaneous memos about similar points, and the theme could lead somebody to conclude that either there's a general conspiracy that they all decided to write the same memo that had the same material in it about the same points to try to undermine the president of the United States, or they independently drew the same conclusions.